All right, let's get a little practice in with WordPress hooks. So here's what we want to do. First of all, we're going to activate our hooks 1.14 starter theme, get that ready. Then we're going to open up our functions.php file. So this is different than our index.php where we've been looking a lot of the times now. And the first thing you'll try doing is enqueuing the theme CSS via an action hook. So this is kind of like the example we saw. You could look at the resources that were pointed to see if you could figure out how to do this on your own. If you can, great. If you can't, don't worry about it. I'm going to go through it and show you how I would approach it. The other thing you want to try is that first one is going to be an action hook. Now you want to try a filter hook, and you're going to add a read more link to the excerpt. So basically just reproducing what we saw in the slides last time, but now we're going to get it really working and make sure that it works in a theme. So go ahead and try this as far as you can. Don't worry if you get stuck, and then come back and I'll go through it with you how I would approach this. Okay, so I've got my theme activated, and now I've come into my functions.php file. So the first thing I'm going to see here is that I've got a function, an add action, another function, and an add filter. So that was kind of what we expected. I'm not making you type all this out on your own, but let's see what we could do here. So enqueue scripts, or enqueue script is what we want to do. So WP enqueue script, and we're going to name this one font-css. And then we simply paste in this link that we have to the custom CSS. So that's all we really have to do for that one. That one's pretty simple. It gets more complicated. This function here, this template tag, this isn't really a template tag so much, but this function built into WordPress can do a lot more. And we'll look at that a little bit here. I'll just show you in this other example. So this is going to get a file from offsite, and we're just giving it a unique name there. Now we could do the same thing with a file built into WordPress. And you know what? I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Not enqueue script. That's for a JavaScript. Jumping ahead of myself. Enqueue style. There we go. Okay, so we've got our main CSS, and now we have to use a custom function or a template tag here called getStyleSheet URI. And what that is going to do is find wherever there is a file named style.css in our root directory, and it's going to go ahead and display that. Now, the other thing we're going to do is make this dependent on our font.css. So the next parameter here is dependencies. So that means that we could say, hey, if you're going to load this, then go ahead and load these other ones as well. So we've got that. And then the last parameter is often a version. And the problem with this, and we'll look at this later, is that sometimes the version can get cached and you have to keep clearing your cache to be able to see the CSS changes you're making. So while I'm in development, I like to enter the last parameter as the current timestamp code. And then it usually automatically works and I don't have to clear cache as often. So again, a lot of this is really complicated. I didn't expect you to necessarily figure out all of this on your own, but here's the real crux of it, and here's what I want to point out. So what we're going to do here is we're going to start off by saying what action we want. So WP enqueue scripts is going to execute in WordPress. It's part of the life cycle of when it's determining what style sheets or JavaScript to load into the page. So we're going to say, hey, when you start making that consideration, if you're going to be loading a theme on the front end, go ahead and because this will only execute when it gets to our theme level, but it could still tap into that WordPress hook system. And a lot of times you won't really see this last parameter added. It's going to default to 10. You could change it, but we'll just leave that default for now. So the real test of this is if we come into our header file and we delete that hardcore link to our CSS. And now it should work just based off of this. So this WP head is part of what the WP enqueue scripts hooks into, and then that's just loading our two style sheets. Let's go ahead and take a look on the front end at how this turned out. Okay, so I could see that my page is displaying, but I'm not really sure if I did it right. So let's just come back in and comment out this add action. And now if I refresh my page, notice that all the styles are gone. So I did do that correct. And if I hadn't removed what was in the header, I would have had duplicate, but it looks like it works. So with that done, let's go ahead and turn our attention to this excerpt. And I want to just pop open the index and notice that instead of the content, notice that we have the excerpt. So what this filter will do is anytime that get the excerpt, which is called whenever there's the excerpt, except that it's also echoed, we want to hook into this using our custom function and set it to a priority of 10 by default. We can make it higher if we want it to run later, or lower if we want it to run earlier, but 10 is default. We'll just leave it like that. So the first thing it's telling us to do is create a new variable called extended excerpt and assign it the value of excerpt. So let's just do that right off the bat. And this is a practice where you get one value and you assign it to another variable that you are going to modify. And this prevents you from having to literally edit that first excerpt that's being passed in, so we could still have that available if we need to. And now it's saying go ahead and append a read more link. So there's a few different ways we could do that. We could break it up into a few different lines. We could try to do it in one. But the first thing we have to look at is this trick of taking the excerpt, which is now assigned to extended excerpt, and simply adding something to that. And the way we're going to do that is by doing period sign equals. And if you remember back to period, it was used for concatenation if we want to add things together. If you do period equals, that's saying, hey, start with this and then just simply add what I'm going to tell you to the end of it. So let's break this up. We're going to have, first of all, a space. And then let's go ahead and put inside of here, let's see, there's a couple different ways we could do it. I'm going to break it up this way. So get permalink. Notice that I'm not saying the permalink, get permalink, because I just want to grab it and then it will be echoed as part of the string. But notice that I have opening here, closing here. So now this is one string that's being concatenated or connected with get permalink. And then that's being connected with this, that all it has is this double quotation mark inside. So this looks a little confusing, but I'm just trying to show you some different ways you could go about doing this. So that's going to be our permalink there. And we could simply just say now, read more. Actually, let's break this up into stages. So we could do this all as one line, but let's just do it in pieces. Now we could say, put a string with read more. And then finally, we could add to the very end of that, close out. And why don't we just make this a little bit fancier, and we'll add a nice little arrow, that right arrow. Okay. So let's go ahead and test this out. What this should do is take the excerpt, assign it to extended excerpt, and then go ahead and build us a read more link. And finally, we will return extended excerpt. So rather than getting the excerpt back as it was first created, we have now grabbed it and modified it. And WordPress is smart enough to know that whatever was passed through here, that's what it wants back. You could modify it, but if you got an excerpt, it wants some modified or some form of an excerpt returned back. And if you don't have this return, then it's not going to work properly, and it could break other things as well. So let's just check out how this works. Okay, notice that I've got my page here, and at the very end, I see this link, read more, and I click it. Well, I'm going to the home page here. So let's switch up and come to our static posts and try this out. So I've got a few posts here. I could see that I've got the excerpt and then read more. I'll go ahead and click on that. And sure enough, it works. So the only problem is that now we have only a single template and it's displaying the same thing every time, which is not what we would really want. But we could solve that problem with using different templates, and we'll learn all about that in the template hierarchy section. For now, what we really wanted to point out was that we've got an action hook that says, hey, when you're ready to enqueue scripts, go ahead and enqueue our scripts, run our scripts. And then it's saying, hey, anytime somebody wants the excerpt or is trying to get the excerpt, don't give them the normal excerpt. Let me modify it and then give that back. Now, hooks are not really going to come in to your day-to-day WordPress practice probably till later. There's a few, like including the style sheet, you need all the time, but really using them for creative problem solving is not too common until you get more advanced. So we'll come back to them later, but you will see these all the time. So it's important to understand at the outset, even though this is a little complicated and advanced, that these exist, and try to wrap your head around, or try to start wrapping your head around what they do. Okay, so there we have a successful practice with WordPress hooks. And even if you couldn't do this on your own, go back now and look at the completed and sample stuff and try to work your way through this. Even if you've already seen it done and you're kind of just copying and pasting, not copying and pasting, but looking and typing, it's still good to go through these motions. And I guarantee you by the end of this course, this is all going to become much more familiar. So if this is new now, that's okay. Now, next up, we're going to wrap up this section with a quick little review before we move on into our next section.